On the 23rd of July 2018, two hikers were making their way through the Big Cypress National Preserve, located in South Florida. As they moved through the large cypress forest, they scanned their surroundings, not wanting to stumble into an alligator-filled swamp. They had hiked around 10 miles, and the pair decided it would be a good idea to rest up for a while at a nearby campsite called Noble's Camp. As they approached the site, they spotted a yellow two-man tent, and as they got closer, they saw a pair of boots and hiking poles lying in the grass outside. They called out, hoping to get a reply from inside the tent, but all they got was silence. Not really thinking too much of it, the pair sat at a picnic table, thankful to be off their feet. Eventually, though, one of the men decided to peer into the tent, holding his breath to steady the uneasy feeling in his stomach. Inside the tent was the twisted body of a man, eyes open, staring straight at the hiker. Recoiling in horror, the two men jumped away from the tent and immediately phoned the police.
Call your county 911. What is the address of your emergency?
I'm at Big Cypress National Preserve.
Is that on Alligator Alley?
It is. It was off of 75, yeah, Alligator Alley.
Did you need the police, fire, medical?
We just found a dead body.
Okay. Are you on the trail?
Yeah, I'm on the trail, and then the dead body is at the Noble, Camp Noble site.
Upon initial investigation, police were unable to identify the man as he had no phone, no credit cards, and no ID. But after a composite picture was spread around, several hikers claimed to have met the man during previous months, though none could give his actual name, as he, like many hikers, went by a trail name. This trail name, or at least one of them, was Mostly Harmless, and it would take 2 years to discover his true identity. With so many people claiming to have seen the man, many of whom snapped pictures with him, how did it take so long to identify him? This is the story of Mostly Harmless and his final hike. The man was extremely malnourished, weighing in at just 83 pounds with a height of 5 foot 8 inches. He had antihistamines and ibuprofen in his system, but neither of these were at lethal levels, and it was determined that he had passed due to starvation just a couple of days before being discovered. He had no tattoos, and the only mark on his body was a faint scar on his abdomen. He had very few possessions. The only things worth mentioning were a couple of well-looked-after notebooks and around $3,500 in cash. Since he had no form of identification on him, police initially attempted to use his fingerprints and dental information to figure out who he was. Unfortunately, neither of these provided any answers, and so they looked to the hiking community for help. As mentioned earlier, once the police composite picture was circulated, several hikers came forward with information. They said that the man was known as Mostly Harmless, and many shared pictures and stories of the man online, hoping that someone would recognise him and come forward. Working backwards through each witness statement and photograph, we are able to trace Mostly Harmless's movement through his 1.5-year-long hike. Mostly Harmless, who I'll refer to as MH from now on, was found at a campsite called Noble's Camp, which is located along the Florida Trail not too far from Interstate 75. Other hikers had passed through this campsite in the days prior to his discovery, and some had even called out to him, but upon getting no response, simply assumed that the man was tired and left him to rest. Just 5 miles away from where he was found, this picture was taken. Taken on the 13th of April, it is unclear what happened during the following month and a half. He doesn't seem particularly worse for wear in this photograph. His smile is perhaps a little forced, but there's nothing to suggest that he was in any kind of trouble. The photograph was taken by Mark Gormley, a so-called trail angel, people who offer help and supplies to those hiking. Mike was concerned when MH stated that he was heading to Key West, wearing an overly heavy backpack and still carrying his winter gear. With the rising heat and humidity that comes with a Florida summer, Mike knew that the hiker would struggle. He offered to take MH's winter gear and mail it to wherever he needed it to go, but MH refused. Perhaps he didn't want to give out an address that could be used to identify him. Whatever the reason, the two parted ways, and Mike would become the last person to see MH alive. The month prior, in March, a hiker had seen MH heading south on the Florida Trail, not far from the 88 store. He was in good spirits and seemed healthy with no obvious issues. Another hiker echoed this sentiment after meeting MH in the Ocala National Forest. In fact, everyone that met him said that MH was easy to get along with. He was fairly quiet, but he would happily joke along with the other hikers. You can see from this picture that his beard is longer, which means that he must have shaved some time between this meeting and the next. Earlier that same month, MH spoke with a man around the Arcilla River section of the Florida Trail. They spoke for some time, and MH told the man that he planned on reaching the southern terminus before the end of July. He also said that he started hiking the Florida Trail in Blackwater, presumably the Blackwater River State Forest. This is a little odd, however, as it differs from what he had told people earlier on. A few days earlier, a couple had been splashing through a flooded section of the trail when they had bumped into MH, who was heading south. They stopped and spoke for a while, and the two hikers were shocked to learn that MH was travelling without a GPS or a detailed map. They had struggled with some sections of the route even with GPS, and so decided to give MH some tips and directions, going into as much detail as possible, hoping that it would be enough to get them on through the next few sections of the trail. MH had also spent a couple of days at a campground in Pine Lodge State Forest, where he told campers that he had been visiting his sister in either Sarasota or Fort Myers, and that is where he had begun his hike. He also claimed to be suffering from ill health, and wanted to get this hike finished while he was still able. This piece of information is a little harrowing, considering that MH would end up dead just a few months later. Although, it is worth noting that his autopsy did not reveal any serious health issues or disease. A month earlier, MH had travelled along the Pinotti Trail, and this photograph was taken of him as he headed through Crestview, Florida. From this, we can assume that he had indeed begun his hike along the Florida Trail from the Blackwater area, and so it seems that, for whatever reason, he made up the story about staying with his sister. Or perhaps the hiker had simply misheard MH or misremembered what had been said. This is another photograph from the same time, showing MH with a bag of supplies and a big smile. The woman who took the picture, another trail angel, said that he had a kind aura, that he was laughing and joking with her. It was around this time that MH told another hiker that he was only doing around 10 miles a day. He didn't give any reason for this as far as I'm aware. Was he just taking his time? No need to rush if you have nowhere to be. Or was he unable to hike more than that per day due to some unseen illness or injury? This photo, which was taken sometime during the early stages of his Florida hike, showed him wearing knee supports, which could indicate that he had either injured them or that he was dealing with a long-standing issue. Regardless, it would certainly explain why he was limiting himself to just 10 miles a day, and could even explain how he ended up in such a dire position, but we'll touch on that more later. This photograph was taken on the 29th of December 2017, and shows MH on Salem Church Road in Georgia. You can see a Ziploc bag sticking out of his coat, and it is unclear if this was supplies given to him by the taker of the photograph, or if this was where he kept his notebooks. His notebooks, even months later when they were found with his body, were in remarkably good condition given the environment, which would make sense if he had kept them covered and protected in this way. He had reached the end of the Appalachian Trail at the beginning of the month, and had this photo snapped at the summit of Springer Mountain. showing the plaque that marks either the end or beginning of the trail, depending on which direction you are heading. While in the Springer Mountain area, MH stayed at a shelter where he spoke to a fellow hiker. The two shared an interest in Doctor Who and the sci-fi genre and spent hours chatting away. MH shared some information about his family. He had a sister and did not have a good relationship with his father. He also spoke briefly of an ex-girlfriend, but didn't go into detail. This video of MH was taken by a different hiker at Springer Mountain. Unfortunately, the GoPro used to capture the footage could not pick up MH's voice when he spoke, but we can see that he seems to be in good spirits, if a little thin. Knowing that he was reaching the end of the Appalachian Trail, MH had purchased paper copies of some maps on the 2nd of December so that he could continue his hike along the Pinoti Trail. He paid for them in cash and posed for a picture holding them up afterwards. This is where we learn that Mostly Harmless had been known by a different name during the Appalachian Trail part of his journey. This name was Denim. This photo was posted by the Mountain Crossings Facebook page after they took it, with the caption, "This is Denim. He worked in the tech industry for the last decade. In June, he went for a 2-week hike on the Appalachian Trail in New York. Today, he passed through the shop. Hiking over half the Appalachian Trail wasn't enough for him. He printed data and purchased maps to hike the Pinoti Trail in Alabama. He has sights for Key West, Florida. Bon voyage, Denim." From this, it seems that MH, or Denim, may not have initially planned to hike all the way along the trail. But maybe, after 2 weeks, he felt like he was where he wanted to be and decided he didn't want to go back to his life just yet. The yellow 2-man tent that Denim was found in had been purchased from the Top of Georgia Hiking Center and Hostel in late November. It was a $300 tent, and he paid for it in cash. The owner of the tent said that he thought it was a little odd for someone to buy a tent when they were so close to the end of the Appalachian Trail, but he had been struggling to sell it, so he was just happy to see it go. Denim spent several nights in the hostel, the 22nd, 24th and 25th. It is unknown where he slept on the night of the 23rd, as it was Thanksgiving and the hostel was closed. The Appalachian Trail was hit by a hurricane during the first week of October, forcing Denim to take shelter at Woodchuck's hostel in Damascus. He would spend 2 days at the hostel and caught the attention of other hikers due to his enormous backpack. One of them attempted to carry the pack and almost toppled over due to its weight, which was a huge 53.5 pounds. You can see in this picture that Denim is wearing those knee supports again, which means that he likely had a recurring or unhealed injury or condition. I can't imagine that hauling around such a heavy pack would have been good for someone with any kind of knee issue, and I would not be at all surprised if, after months of doing just that, Denim's knees gave out on him. Maybe that is why he lay in that tent and wasted away, unable to walk any further to get help. This photo was taken at the Mountain Home Hostel in Virginia on the 22nd of September 2017. Denim had told other hikers that he was heading towards Georgia, and he had been travelling with a companion for at least a few weeks at this point. That companion, whose trail name is Obsidian, took this picture of Denim at that same hostel. Despite travelling with the man for some time, Obsidian, who immediately came forward to speak with police after Denim was found, unfortunately didn't have any information about the mysterious man's true identity. She knew that he had recently gotten out of a relationship before beginning his hike, that he worked in the tech industry and had started his journey close to New York City, but he never divulged any truly personal information, nothing that could tie him to any one place or identity. Several of the hostels and shelters that Denim stayed at required a real name for their records, and every time, Denim would use the name Ben Billamy. Of course, this name was researched extensively by both police and members of the public, but ultimately, it led nowhere. In August, Denim was photographed at the Calf Mountain shelter. making what appears to be a peanut butter sandwich. He had previously been spotted close to Shenandoah, travelling with an older woman with dreadlocks, most likely obsidian. There are very few sightings from the start of Denham's hike, with just the occasional mention of him. However, from these few encounters, we know that Denham was around the Appalachian Trail between April and July, heading out of New York. He apparently told one hiker that he had recently quit his job at a large IT company and had been living in the Bear Mountain Park in New York before he decided to head south along the trail. It is also assumed that he got his trail name of Denham during the first month or so of his hike, and, according to those that spoke to him, it was due to him wearing jeans at first, before more experienced hikers convinced him to ditch them in favour of more suitable attire. And for 2 years, that is all we knew about Denham. Mostly Harmless, Ben Billamy, the unknown hiker. Many people pored over the photos and information. The notebooks were released and were found to be full of computer code, which proved that Denham was indeed in the tech field, but not much else. People shared the man's story online, collecting all the information they could and looking through missing persons databases for matches. Despite all of the people that had met him being able to track his movements through several states, all the way back to where his hike began, we still didn't know who this man was. That was until finally, just out of chance, in December 2020, someone saw a photograph of him online and instantly recognised him as their college roommate. The roommate was able to put police in touch with the man's mother and DNA tests were run. They got a match. So, who exactly was Mostly Harmless? His name was Vance Rodriguez. He was 42 years old. Originally from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, he had moved to New York later in life. He did, in fact, have a sister, a twin sister in fact, as well as an older brother. He had struggled with depression from a young age. The scar on his stomach had been from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He had been just 15 years old at the time. He survived the wound, having sought help himself, but he continued to struggle for many years. His old roommate stated that Vance was often distant, and even hostile to those around him. He would lock himself away for entire days. He did not have a good relationship with his family, especially his father, so he cut all ties to them. Eventually, he got himself a good job as a software engineer and began a 5-year-long relationship. Vance was reportedly abusive during this relationship, and it seems that anyone that knew Vance was not surprised by this news. His next relationship was with a woman in New York, which is why he ended up moving there. Being a talented coder, his company allowed him to continue working remotely, but he ended up quitting after a while and lived off his savings. His relationship deteriorated due to his threatening and abusive behaviours, and by the winter of 2016, his girlfriend had left him. He was an avid player of a coding game known as Screeps. He posted on their forum several times between January and April of 2017, and this is where we go back to those notebooks that were found with him. The ones he had kept in perfect condition, even while hiking across several states over a year and a half. The notes inside had stumped police, and even when they were released to the public, it took a long time for people to link them to Screeps. It seems that Vance had been writing code for the game while he had been hiking. Vance had left his apartment in a hurry. He hadn't even cleared out his fridge. He didn't take his wallet, phone, or passport. The gear he used was a mix of high and low end, which could mean that it was thrown together quickly, or that he picked up stuff during his hike, as other hikers will often leave supplies and gear that they don't want or need anymore for the next person. All of this paints a picture of someone that was tired of their life, maybe of who they were. There was nobody to tie him down anywhere, nobody to miss him. That is why it took so long to identify him. Nobody was looking for him. Nobody even knew that he was missing. Vance Rodriguez was clearly a complicated man. a flawed man. A man that left his life behind to trek across the country, leaving a lasting impression on those he met and capturing the interest of hundreds of people online. We don't know why Vance ended up wasting away in a tent in the middle of Florida. We don't know if he stayed out there intentionally or if something incapacitated him. What we do know is that Vance ventured into the wilderness without telling anyone that knew him. He never shared his real name or any information that could be traced back to his old life. Maybe he would have been content with remaining mostly harmless. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the channel and leave any suggestions for future videos down in the comment section below. Thanks for joining me for this story, and keep yourself safe out there.